The John Campea Show, in association with Designing Hollywood, presents... Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast. I'm your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. Today's episode is sponsored by Paris Costumes. The Designing Hollywood podcast show is dedicated to all things movies, the movie industry, and its talented professionals. Clothes have always been crucial to movie making, and in the early days of powerful Hollywood studios, costume designers not only created looks for film characters, they dressed the stars themselves. Today's guest is an American award-winning costume designer whose credits include Bridgerton, Fatal Attraction, Wall Street, The Greatest Showman, Maleficent 2, and so much more. She is a frequent collaborator of actor Michael Douglas, having overseen the costume design for films Fatal Attraction, Wall Street, Basic Instinct, A Perfect Murder, Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps, and Behind the Candelabra. Born and raised in New York City, her early interests in fine art, photography, and fashion led to the prestigious High School of Music and Art. After graduation, she further pursued her study of design at the School of Visual Arts and Parsons School of Design. She entered the world of fashion after Parsons School of Design. Her fashion-forward instincts quickly propelled her to become one of the most sought-after designers in the field. Her talent for creating youthful, au courant style reverberated throughout the industry, and she has been nominated twice for BAFTA and Emmy Awards, winning the Emmy for Behind the Candelabra. In 1998, she received a Saturn Award for her work in Starship Troopers and has been honored with the Cutty Sark Menswear Award for her sartorial statement in Wall Street. Greed apparently was good. Her work has been displayed in the 50 Designer 50 Films exhibit at the American Motion Picture Association, the Florence Biennale, FITM's annual film and television exhibits in 2011 through 13 and in 2015, and the Hollywood Costume Exhibition, which originated at London's Victoria and Albert Museum. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome the award-winning costume designer Ellen Mirojnick to the Designing Hollywood podcast. It is so great to have you.
I'm just thrilled to be here.
I got to say, it's a little difficult for me to be sitting with you because I looked over your career and you have worked on so many of the movies I've seen probably way too many times. And I have to ask you, because you're here in front of me now, Michael Douglas's leather jacket in Black Rain, one of the great leather jackets of any leather jacket in the history of cinema. Did you buy that? Did you build that? Where did that leather jacket come from? Because I still want it 33 years later.
You're not the only one. However, it came from a very, I'll just say outright, a very cheap shop on 32nd Street and 6th Avenue in New York City.
You're kidding.
No. And it was not expensive.
Wow. I mean,
I cannot tell you how many people wanted that jacket. How many people would pay anything for the jacket? I think the jacket was under $100, but it was really inexpensive. It was a very lucky find because it was perfect. I mean, there were not 7 leather jackets in front of me to pick one or what have you. There was one and, of course, multiples, and it was quite convenient to be under $100, and it fit Michael perfectly, and there you have it. There you have it. People wanted to copy it. They just wanted the jacket.
You know, I said to Marilyn once that I think that all of you costume designers for the last, anyone who's worked from the 80s on should get together and be able recreate these iconic
Pieces?
And sell them. Because I think that you could buy, like, you could get together and put these, because there's so many different, like we were talking Basic Instinct, Sharon Stone's white dress, that she get, that interrogation dress. I'm sure many a woman has looked at that movie and said, I want that dress.
Well, that's absolutely true. But if you put a group of designers together today, and we went through the films of the 80s or the 90s, I want you to tell me how many people would have seen those films to be able to really want what we created now. I mean, yes, the older fans, absolutely. I being one of them. But
But I think if they're iconic,
well, yeah, I don't disagree. If it's iconic and it's gone down in history, Marilyn's red dress on Julia
right,
in what's the name of that film? God Almighty, Pretty Woman.
oh,
Pretty,
right,
Marilyn's red dress in Pretty Woman. Um, uh, a Gordon Gekko shirt. I mean, the horizontal stripe Gordon Gekko shirt.
right.
Well, he actually has a couple of things that would equal iconic iconic stature, but mainly Gordon Gekko. More
Sure.
that look without a question of a doubt.
Well, I mean, this is an interesting. I wasn't going to ask you this, but I'm going to ask you now. When you work on something like Wall Street, those suits in the '80s, I mean, that was iconic. Like all of Wall Street probably watched that movie and like, I want to look like Gordon Gekko.
Eventually,
right,
eventually, because for example, that film, I was in love with what Oliver wrote. That was first and foremost. And I was seduced by it. I was absolutely seduced by the writing. And and what I really wanted to do was find a way to tell the story of Wall Street with possibly visually elevating the genre.
hmm
Okay. And so what does that mean? Well, we're going to make Gordon Gekko a movie star. We're going to make Charlie Sheen a movie star. So what does that mean for me? Well, if I thought about it, he would have the same elegance and seductiveness of Cary Grant. He would have a sartorial splendor as the Duke of Windsor. I think I threw a couple of other things in there at the same time, but what I did in looking for images that equaled that, it was difficult to find. But I had
right.
that image in my head until I found what I was looking for. And, you don't go out, honest to God, you do not ever. And if you do, you better like hang it up. I think. But you don't go out and say, well, I'm going to make an iconic character now.
Sure.
It always has to, in my opinion, when that happens, there is something that's touched the audience heart. It's an emotional reaction, not the most beautiful suit in the world, not the most beautiful shirt, none of that, not even the white dress or what have you. There is something else that has touched the audience in a way that I don't think that you could have ever written as you read the script in a description of what you wanted to achieve.
Well, it's interesting to me that I think that if you look at your career, you really were at the cutting edge of cool, if that
Oh,
makes
thank
sense.
you.
I mean, all of when I met Marilyn for the first time, you and Marilyn were really the two costume designers whose names I knew.
Mm.
I wasn't, and look at me, I knew nothing of fashion, but when it was almost like there was a culture of, if you worked on these movies, they were going to be cool.
Mm.
And
That's nice of you to
oh, it's
say.
true. Well, and look, it going back and looking at your credits before this interview speaks for itself. I mean, you worked on all of these really iconic movies that also in the home video era were played over and over again.
Hmm.
People started watching movies on cable over and over and over again, so you could suddenly become aware of these things and remember people's names. But like, for instance, as a Paul Verhoeven fan, the way he lit movies, like I would watch anything because if Jan de Bont especially was shooting, they were using lots of fluorescence to light things, and they used in Basic Instinct a lot of Steadicam. There's a lot
Hmm.
of all those. Is it George Zunza, the actor,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
his partner? Even he was kind of supposed to be the schlubby guy,
Hmm.
but he was cool. Like you gave him cool outfits, even though he was the
But was it cool because the story became like out of this world, or was it a combination? I ask this because there's so many times that it just happens to be a combination of elements, okay? You
sure.
have a great script, you have great actors, now Jan comes along and he lights it. He has a particular feel.
Yeah.
And Jan and Paul had a very, very interesting relationship. And I would say that Jan was Paul's eyes in a way,
Right.
and however, I would say Paul had a visceralness about him that you had to hit those notes. Do you know what I mean? So the whole package came together.
Yeah.
When working with Oliver Stone, he had Bobby Richardson, and he relied on him to be his eyes. For Bobby to design the light and the scene in a way that would be exemplary to Oliver's writing and what he wanted to bring across.
But I think, like you said, it's a combination of elements. But come on. Like when we were talking Strange Days, the clothes in Strange Days are awesome.
I love Strange Days. Strange Days is a film that I think it actually, there is a movie I think that was made recently that I believe the device they used in the movie was quite similar to the one that Rafe was peddling.
Oh, yeah.
I think that it really was. I think that the idea of what that was brilliant. And it was, that movie was supposed to be, I guess it was 1995 it came out. So we made it like 4 or 5, right? And I remember having this conversation with Catherine and Lily Kilvert and so on, because we were really telling a story that had to take place New Year's Eve of 1999
Right.
into 2000. Wow, it seems so far away, but not really,
No.
right? And so Catherine was very clear about this amalgamation of different cultures coming to California at that time, in Los Angeles particularly, at that time, and that would kind of feel like what the city felt like and what was different 5 years later, of course. And I remember doing a mood board that was a number of pages. That's one of my favorite for all times. I mean, it actually hit so many notes. It became kind of the visual Bible for the film. And it actually it was one of the most interesting films to design.
Well, Lenny Nero, Ralph Fiennes' character, his clothes are a big part of that. You see his clothes and what he's going to wear because he has to look the part, and all those actors. I mean, it was so Angela Bassett's outfits.
Angela, right?
Man, did you make her look good? I would not want to meet her in a dark alley because she would beat the heck out of you. She was great. But even people like Tom Sizemore and of course Michael
Juliette
Wincott,
Lewis,
and when she sings that musical number that is incredible.
Yeah.
I mean that whole movie. I mean I could wax rhapsodic about that for, but I should.
I'm so happy that you like the film because I think it is a film way before its time.
Yep.
And I think that, and I say that because of culture and the cultural element, the music, what it looked like, and what the city has become, and actually what we have all become.
Absolutely. And I thought that movie, coming off the heels of the LA riots, would have been a much bigger movie than it was because it was incendiary in terms of its politics.
Yes.
And, you had, I think it was Jay Cox and James Cameron wrote the script.
Yes.
And two obviously great screenwriters, and then Catherine Bigelow directing, and then the music and all the performances. I mean, it was, and when you find out what's going on when the conspiracy is revealed, it's pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
And it's almost come true.
All right, let's re-release it now.
I know,
let's
right?
See what happens.
Well, you want to hear something sad about that film is that you can't, in America, it has not ever been released on Blu-ray.
Really?
It is not. My Blu-ray I had to get from Germany.
Wow.
And for whatever reason, Lightstorm, there's 4 Lightstorm movies that have never been released on Blu-ray.
What
There's
are the others?
Steven Soderbergh's Solaris, his remake, True Lies and The Abyss.
You're kidding.
Are not on Blu-ray. They're only on DVD.
Wow.
And Strange Days. And
That's really interesting.
I don't know why. And I'm like, come on, James.
There must be some very specific attachment he has.
I don't know. But listen, I wanted to get back and
Okay.
talk to you about, because I'll geek out with you and we'll never
All
get.
right.
But you have a very rigorous academic design background.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that interesting because a lot of the costume designers do. They have very rigorous design backgrounds. They're also a working knowledge of art history. I didn't realize that so many costume designers would go look at, like if you're working on a period piece, go look at paintings in museums to tell you about the color and the texture. And I didn't realize that was the case. How important do you think your academic background and all the design work that you had, how important was that to the rest of your career?
I think that the design background is a very, very important foundation. It is without a question of a doubt. It's part of the fabric of my being. I mean, I started to paint when I was a child
Oh,
at about, I think I started to paint like at 5 years old. Went to art schools very, very early on to just allow my talent to grow. Fortunately, my mom saw it and never took it away, you
mm,
know? And so I was very, very fortunate that always was involved with art. So that meant not only painting, drawing, and classes, but museums at a very, very early age. So there was not, it wasn't anything new that I wanted to all of a sudden study. It was out of it was a growth of who I was
mm.
and what I wanted to learn. The one thing about costume design, which is kind of interesting when it comes to this amazing education that we do actually achieve, is that there's a lot that we might not know before we go into a project, but we will know a massive amount by the time that project is finished. And so to the doorway to all research is it's endless. It is just endless. And how you approach the research is also endless. I might do not do the same research as any other designer, or we might match each other in certain ways. It's how you see things.
Mm.
And I think that I was always a person from the time I was little that I was just so curious about so many things and seeing what was before me and what was beyond the rainbow
Mm.
was just something that lit me up. So I just would never stop.
But I would think, when I say cool, we're talking about a combination of things, which is true. But
Hmm.
you in particular had a sensibility, even looking at Reckless and the Flamingo
Hmm.
Kid. Reckless is an inherently cool film.
Hmm.
And Aidan Quinn just,
That was his first film.
I remember seeing that guy. I'm like, where did this guy come from? And,
Hmm.
and him and Daryl Hannah, you work with Daryl Hannah again on Wall Street. But
Hmm.
that movie was very different than any of the other teen movies that were
Yeah,
coming out at the time. There was a cool factor to that film. I mean, it was more erotic. It had better music. It was
it was
darker.
rougher.
It
It
was
was
rougher.
rougher. It was gritty and it was rough. And I think that it was the first film that Jamie Foley made out of his student films. I could be wrong about
I
that,
think you're right.
but I think that that's what it was, and it had an extremely independent feel to it. So, and I think it was in. I don't actually remember this, but I remember it being small. It was
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
It wasn't a big film, and I remember that Jamie had a vision and he would execute it if it was the last thing he would do. So everybody just loved being kind of tied up in Weirton, West Virginia to make this thing. And it was a cool, gritty film. And nobody looked at any of the other teenage films that were out at that time.
I mean, people think about teenage movies. You're thinking John Hughes. You're thinking
Hmm.
Breakfast Club and
Hmm.
Pretty in Pink and all this stuff. And those are great films.
Yes.
But I preferred things like whether it was Reckless or Risky Business, which was a
Hmm.
year before.
Hmm.
But even like The Flamingo Kid, same year, same came
Hmm.
out. That film totally different than Reckless. But
Oh,
it's
without a
still.
question.
But the design, the clothes
Oh,
in that
thank
movie are
you.
great, though. I mean,
That was fun also. Gary Marshall. That was actually Gary Marshall's, I think, second film. I don't think it was. I think he made a film before. And this was his second feature film. He, of course, was involved in so much television,
Yeah.
but this was his second feature film. And we went to that beach club in the summer, and we never left till Christmas time, I think. It
Yeah.
was so cold. Those lovely people would put their bathing suits on at 10 o'clock in the morning on a day of 30 degrees at a beach club in Atlantic Beach in New York. And he he just made everybody laugh, and we had a really, really good time.
Well, it comes through. I mean, I really like. It's funny to again revisiting all, looking at your past work. I'm like, oh my god, I know where I know what movie theater I saw the Flamingo Kid in. But let me ask you, did you, with this art background you had and your mother let you paint, were you a fan of theater growing up in New York, and did you love movies?
I loved movies. I had two things. When I was young, when I was 6, I had an aunt who would take me to the theater every month. I would go and see a musical. And I saw musicals in their first runs that I was quite fortunate to have been able to see, inclusive of Barbara Streisand's early work.
Wow.
It was a wow. I was a little girl, but I fell in love with musicals. I don't think we ever went to a play, but musicals were once a month. I looked forward to those times so much.
Wow.
And movies, I loved movies. I was a kid who looked up at the screen and saw flickering lights and said, "Take me away."
What were some of your favorites?
Auntie Mame. Auntie Mame to this day is my favorite film ever. Indiscreet, I saw at I think I was 7. I went to Radio City Music Hall. I think somebody was babysitting me.
Wow.
They took me to Radio City Music Hall, and we saw Indiscreet, a beautiful film. It's beautiful to look at. I'm a fan of the film. It's absolutely Stanley Donen, without a question of a doubt. The colors are absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous. The apartment was beautifully designed.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that film. So that Auntie Mame, with Auntie Mame, still to this day, I could watch it over and over and over and over and over again. I love it more than anything. I loved Some Like It Hot. I loved Rebel Without a Cause. I was like just fascinated by, but I don't know that I loved it like I'm telling you. I loved these other kinds of films. But I loved going to the movies. I remember going to Loewy's Paradise movie theater in the Bronx on Fordham Road, and it had a ceiling that was all stars. It was twinkling stars. And I remember seeing Ben-Hur there.
Wow.
And
First run?
that I can't tell you. That I really, really can't tell you. But I remember seeing Ben, and it was bigger than life.
Right.
And then I remember the Ziegfeld Theater in New York, and
Which
seeing
the late
beautiful.
lamented and now recently closed in the last couple
Yes,
of years.
yes.
Damn them.
It was horrible. I remember seeing Cabaret there. And
I'm a huge
how
Bob
does it get
Fosse
better?
fan.
Yeah, I'm a huge Bob Fosse fan as
All
well.
That Jazz is one of the reasons I wanted to edit as a film editor.
Really?
Oh, All That Jazz
It's
is one of my favorite films of all time.
amazing. It's an amazing film.
Amazing.
But his talent was beyond recognition. I mean, it was just beyond.
Yeah, and I love watching interviews with him. There's a lot of interviews you can find on. He was such a monstrously talented human being.
Very much so.
And he must have been a fun guy to know. Did you ever meet him?
No, I never met him. And I was in like the next class, so to speak. You know what I mean? So I wasn't in that groove at that time, but I was a great admirer of his work, and used to go and see his shows all the time. Anything that he directed and choreographed, there was nothing like it in the world. And so I think he set the world on fire.
Oh,
with his
he was
work.
amazing. Now, when you were at places like Parsons and you were more fashion than film.
Yes.
Now, did you see yourself ever getting into movies?
No.
Really?
No.
Not at all?
Not at all.
Not even a little bit of an inkling of a dream?
Nope.
Wow.
No, not at all. I was actually thrown out of Parsons. I'm here to tell you. They said, one day you'll be a designer. We can't tell you when, but you're taking up space. So could you leave? And
Wow.
and that
How
was
was that for you?
I don't remember caring that much.
Oh,
I really didn't remember caring because technically I was not proficient. I couldn't drape, I couldn't make a pattern. I could absolutely design, and I could absolutely instruct an assistant what I wanted in the draping area, and I could instruct a pattern maker about what I was hoping to see, but I couldn't do it. And that wasn't part of the program. So I think I failed miserably in those fields. And also, I couldn't sew. And 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 they made you sew by hand till I was thrown out. Um, a children's project that was a total mess. The design was great. The project was a mess, and they said, "Thanks, Ellen, but you have to go."
wow. So then how did you end up going from the fashion industry into film?
Well, I was very fortunate in the fashion industry. I was very, very fortunate. I worked for some amazing people, and when
And
I
were you in
worked,
New York at the time?
yes,
Because that must
yes,
have been fun.
it was.
Were
Listen,
you like going to Studio 54?
hmm
Did you know Halston?
no, no, I was a kid. I didn't know anybody,
Oh,
but
okay.
I just I would frequent any disco you could imagine. Any place that would let me in. I would lie about my age. I wouldn't care. I would just go. But when I started in fashion, because I was thrown out of school, there was a man by the name of Bernie Ozer who was head of merchandising. He was like a very, very, very important man in the junior sportswear, the junior area at that time. And that was a very new
Sure.
category. Because when I went to Parsons, they were hoping you'd work on 7th Avenue and become a couture designer and so on.
Hmm.
But I was just more interested in junior fashion or children's wear. And so this wonderful Bernie Ozer took me under his wing, and he made me walk the runway. He'd do like 3 shows a year. I had to walk the runway with some extraordinary models I was fortunate enough to be in the company of. He'd send me out on the street and say, "Bring back 6 trends."
Wow.
Um, he'd he'd say, "Go and find whatever in come back and tell me what you saw when you were dancing." I mean, it was like things of that nature. And also, he introduced me to 2 fellows that I went to work for very soon thereafter, and in the junior sportswear market. And it was an extraordinary experience. These guys were extraordinary. Herb Schneiderman was without a question my mentor, and taught me everything from working with people to how to get the best out of your team, how to feel confident in what you want to design or what the themes are, how to interpret, etc.,
Hmm.
and how to actually spot when somebody didn't know what the heck they were doing. How
Wow.
to spot that. I was very, very fortunate. So I stayed there for about 7 years, and then I got bored.
But then how did you make the
Well,
transition?
well, at that time, Herb was a great, great, great mentor, and Herb invested in this film. And the film that he invested in for a friend of his who was going to direct it is a film called The French Quarter, starring Virginia Mayo and a bevy of girls. And Bruce Davison was in it as
Oh,
well. Okay. And it took place in New Orleans in the French Quarter in like 1910 or something of that, somewhere around there. And it was kind of a precursor to Pretty Baby.
okay.
And so I went, my husband at the time was working on the film. I went to visit him, and they didn't have a costume designer. And the director of the film, my boss's friend, said, "Do you want to do the costumes?" And I said, "Yeah." And so I had to go back to New York, beg Herbie to give me 8 weeks off. And I didn't, I promise you, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I jumped right in the deep end of the pool
Yeah.
and figured it out.
That had to have been a fun show then.
Well, it was no money, absolutely no money. I mean, I think the whole budget was something like $300,000 of the film. So it was no money, but fortunately, I was introduced to a number of people at Brooks Van Horn who were very, very helpful. And I also knew how to create clothes. And so once I got the silhouette in my head and knew what I needed to do, I could instruct, I could fabricate it,
Hmm.
and I can instruct people to make it. So it was a little bit of a potpourri, but we pulled it off.
Wow. And then you just never look back?
I stayed in the fashion business for a little while because my wonderful mentor, Herb Schneiderman, would not let me leave till I could make a living.
Wow. So he really
I
did
was
look
very
out for you.
fortunate. Very fortunate, yes.
Well, it was it Fame? Did you work on the Fame TV
Yes.
series?
Well, I was the assistant costume designer on Fame, Alan Parker's Fame.
Oh, okay. That movie.
That's where it started,
It's
basically.
incredible. Hot Lunch Jam. Shake it, Sadie, serving lady.
You are
I,
amazing. You
I,
are amazing.
I love Fame.
It's a great film.
It is a great movie. I watch it all the time. That cast is incredible. I didn't realize that you'd worked on that.
Yes, I was assistant to Christy Zia, and who I had met doing commercials for a very big commercial house at that time. Um, I think that she did designed a film before that, and this was my first film.
Wow. I mean, what again, a film that has an incredible look. I mean, that wave of directors coming from England who had specialized in commercials. I mean, Alan Parker.
He was an amazing, amazing talent.
Oh my God. I mean, he
He was
he
really
made
smart.
Fame and Birdie,
Yeah.
another movie I loved, you know.
He's a very, very, very talented writer and a very talented director. And from Fame, the movie, I think it was like in the same year or something, or 6 months later, that the TV show was gonna. Oh, no, no, no. It was a while later. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it was when John Lennon passed.
Yeah,
I
because Fame was
remember.
80,
No,
1980, I think. The
we
movie.
made it in 78.
Yeah.
We made it in 78 to 79. Very soon after that, we did the TV series, and I started that TV series, and I was the designer of that.
And the TV series was good too.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah,
I really liked the show as well.
but that ran for a long time, I think.
Yeah, it really
Yeah.
did. So, but then you really started, I guess, after then Fame. Was Reckless and the Flamingo Kid your first features?
By myself, it was like Fame. I'll tell you, Fame, Endless Love. I was the assistant on as well with Christy, and then I didn't know how to be really anybody else's assistant. It just we were a good pair. She went off and wanted to do her thing, and I think was I knew I wanted to be a costume designer by that time, and I wanted to do my own work. So Reckless, I believe, Reckless came before Flamingo Kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, by a year or so. And I wanted to become a costume designer, so I did it.
No, it's amazing. I mean, you look at those. So those are 80. Those came out in 84. Then by 86, which is when Wall Street came out.
80, well, in 1986, we did Fatal Attraction first, and then Wall Street right after it.
Because I was going to say, you began that association with Michael Douglas. Both of the costume designs in those movies are incredible.
Thank you.
I mean, and they have that cool factor. I mean, Adrian Lyne,
Adrian, there's nobody.
another British film director
I love
who
the
it was
British
great to
film
see him
director.
come back. But maybe that was another thing that I'm responding to as well, because that sort of high contrast look. It was
Hmm.
there was that look. I love that look. I mean, Ridley Scott, who you then work with
Black
again with
Rain.
Michael Douglas on Black Rain. Um, So you did Fatal Attraction, Wall Street, and then soon after Black Rain, and it was interesting because Fatal Attraction and Black Rain are both Paramount Pictures,
Yes,
and then
with the same producers
right, it was Sherry Lansing,
and
Stanley
Stanley
Jaffe,
Jaffe.
yeah, and I mean that whole era of people, whether
People
the
and talent was beyond I mean, you nobody would. I don't think I always wonder about that talent and what we were very fortunate to do at that period of time. I always wonder how it would be recognized today. How would it be accepted? How would it be thought about? What would people, how would people respond? Because it was so special in my memory.
oh, I look, I mean, as a viewer, I thought so too. Now, um, what? 5 minutes? We just started. So
You better like hurry up and cut to the chase.
I'm enjoying. No, I mean, this has been. I've learned more from you in the last hour. But so I wanted to ask you about you've worked with some of the greatest film directors. I mean, everybody from Steven Spielberg to Ridley Scott to Paul Verhoeven to Alan Parker, and then also talent like Michael Douglas. I mean, in that short period of time, Michael Douglas became a defining.
He became a movie star.
Yeah, between Gordon Gekko and the character in Fatal Attraction, and look, I'm a huge Black Rain. As a matter of fact, I even have an action figure now that I'm thinking about it of Sato.
Wow.
Of a Japanese company, because when that actor died, as an honor,
he died soon after.
yeah, and they made a figure of him, and it's
Wow.
in that long leather that jacket that he's wearing in New York. And it's funny, I didn't even think about it. I could have brought it here, and that would have been weird. But I still have that figure. It's incredible. But that you were there making. I mean, the look of Michael Douglas in both Fatal Attraction, it's that New York, that iconic power. I mean, because Michael Douglas was, even though he was a dad, he still was that
But it wasn't
executive.
power. It was just how I always saw New York. It was not, there are certain things that are ingrained, that it just is it's, you can't describe. It's beyond words. You just look, see, it has to be, and you do it. And working with Adrian, Adrian had a look and a feel at that time that was specific. We happened to have the same level of taste.
Oh, because you did Jacob's Ladder too.
Jacob's Ladder is one of my favorite.
Oh my God. I mean, Jacob's Ladder is still to this day some of the greatest in-camera scary effects.
And you know why?
Ever.
Because Adrian, God bless him, Adrian could not make up his mind and was totally rattled with the idea, and this was very early on, of choosing visual effects before the fact. And so he needed to have practical effects at his disposal. So what Richard Dean, who is the makeup artist, and myself did, is that we created his visual effects that he could use. We did studies upon studies. We'd hire models. We'd use different kinds of devices and elements to create this shake and what would be scary and what would scare you. And it was great. It was really great fun at that time.
I mean, man, that film, you watch it today, it
scary.
holds up. It's still scary. It's got the scene on the gurney when they're pushing him deeper and deeper into hell, and terrifying.
It is a terrifying film.
And again, that's it's funny. All these very cool. You worked on some very cool movies.
Oh, thank you.
No,
thank
but
you.
when you have a relationship with someone like Michael Douglas, I mean, over these 3 films, as he's coming out as a movie star, what's it like having an ongoing relationship with an actor? And what is that interaction like? How do you guys develop a shorthand in terms of what looks good on him?
I think that the easiest way to answer it is that once you get to work with someone that you work with over and over again, it's not that all of them were by accident. They were not planned, number one. Number two, you do have a shorthand. You do have a level of trust that is very, very, very strong. It's a very intimate relationship that you develop over time with anybody that you work with over and over and over again, particularly an actor, it was not about Michael's rise in on the level of fame. It was really Michael actually doing different kinds of characters
Mm,
that people he hit the zeitgeist. It was he became the everyman that everyone wanted to be.
right.
And so we had the good fortune of creating lots of different type of characters. Dan Gallagher, for example, in Fatal
Yeah.
Attraction is totally different than Gordon Gekko. We did not know that Gordon Gekko would become basically a noun.
Right.
We didn't
Still
really
to this day.
still to this day, that he would become the he was the villain, and every single man from age 30 on, as soon as that movie opened, wanted to be him.
Oh yeah.
Wanted to be
He
him.
was an anti-hero,
All
not a
right.
villain.
He was not the villain. He was an anti-hero. Or certainly became the villainous anti-hero in any way you wanted to look at it. Because he would always, but I'm the villain. What? But I'm the villain.
Money never sleeps, pal.
Money never sleeps. There's
And I even
another
like
line.
that.
There's another line that he says to Charlie on the fun when he tells him money never sleeps. That's really funny. But in any event, it's memorable. But Gordon Gekko was very different than Nick.
Curran in Basic Instinct.
Very different. Now, does he always have a bit of a suitedness about him? Yes. But they're different levels and different ideas. So there is a shorthand, not only in trust, but also in imagery.
Okay, I got to give it up for you because the sweater he wears to the club in Basic Instinct, the V-neck sweater. Come on. He must have been like, can I look cooler? Do I have to wear this sweater to this club? Still the greatest. It might be one of the greatest choices ever in a movie.
Thank you.
Because you're like, dude, you look out of place. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you. To this day, I question the choice.
Oh, you have to. But it's
to this day, that is one costume in particular that I question to this day. Like, why didn't I put a T-shirt underneath that? Why did I just let him not? And I swear, I have this conversation with myself all the time.
No. You know why? Because here's the thing. He's out of his league. And that outfit shows you like, dude, you clearly have never gone to a club like this ever before in your life. And I know you're trying to look cool, but by not wearing an undershirt and that's his statement. Oh, I look good, don't I? As I go into this club that would never exist anywhere in the world, but it's the best club ever.
Of course.
But him showing up in that is one of my favorite things in any movie ever.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, but I'll tell you the reason why it was the choice. The reason why it was the choice was that at that moment in time, the connection between he and Sharon's character, I needed to be able to have real clothing that she could put her hand in easily.
Right, okay.
And her dress actually came way down. I mean, there was no back, and it actually sat right above her her tush, and so that he could put his hand into the dress very quickly. So it was really about choreography.
Right. And in that scene, of course, the ultimate diss when she slams the bathroom stall door on him. It's great. I love that movie so much. Well, listen, I know we're at the end. I mean, I feel like I just started talking to you.
That's the beginning.
But I would ask you, with all the people and the way the world is changing, Hollywood is a much different place now. We were talking about HR departments and people getting called all the times. But what advice could you impart to, I thought what you said at the beginning about your academic background and being interested in everything was, but what other advice might you give to somebody watching this who's interested in pursuing a career in costume design or fashion?
Well, I think that the one thing that I think is essential more than anything in the world is your level of curiosity. And your level of curiosity and how deep will you allow yourself freely, without limits, no boundaries, no made up stories? how deep will you allow yourself to explore that? And I think that you have to nourish your imagination continually. And I think that that's really, really important. And I think level of study is fine. I am not a huge proponent of education in
Hmm.
this. I am not. I'm very serious because I
You mean traditional education?
tradition yes, sorry, traditional education. I'm not a huge proponent simply because there is a level that you really need to seek and experience more. The one thing, there is another thing, and that is, pardon me, half a sec. Sorry. The one thing that I would say is you have to learn how to communicate. Communication is the key because you will find yourself, if you're fortunate enough to be able to work and no, even on the lowest of lowest or student films or take your camera out and do it. And there's always going to be somebody else you have to talk to. And what is really important is learning to communicate your ideas and understanding um, of who you're talking to, what you have to, who you're talking to, what they will hear, how you will best show it, explain it. And sometimes you have to be the mediator between a producer, a director, a studio,
Hmm.
an actor. Everybody could have five different opinions, four different opinions. Well, how are you going to get your contribution across to all of them? The one thing that they do not teach in school, in any film school, any design school, any school, art school, is the means of how do you communicate. And I think that it's the saddest thing in the world because that is, I think, the most important, that it's the most important connecting piece to becoming what you've dreamt of becoming.
Right. Wow, that's incredible advice. Do you have any presence on social media?
Hmm.
Where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram. They can find me on, well, I don't really do Facebook anymore, but they can find me on Instagram by L&M.
Okay. Oh, well,
That's
that's
that's that's what I am, and I don't think I don't do TikTok really.
right.
I wish I did, but I don't.
Sure. But no, I mean, people do now. Do you post a lot of your work on Instagram?
I post what I can. I don't. There's very, very different now because you can't just post willy nilly.
Right.
You sign your life away,
Yeah.
and we don't own anything.
Right.
So that's a little difficult. So you wait till you can post.
Well, Mirojnick, this was an amazing conversation. I would keep you here for another hour, or at least, like so many more. But I will end this. I want to thank our sponsor, Paris Costumes. Paris Costumes was founded in 1856. It is a costume hiring and manufacturing company that covers all periods and cultures for TV, films, advertisement, and theater. Paris Costumes has a portfolio of over 6 million garments and accessories from all periods and cultures. And thank you for sponsoring the Designing Hollywood podcast. And thank you to our guest costume designer, Ellen Mirojnick, for being,
Thank you.
you are so cool. And it's been so
Oh,
cool to
thank
talk
you
to you.
so much.
It's been great. And a special thanks to our executive producer, Martika Ibarra, and of course, legendary costume designer, Marilyn Vance, our executive producers. Thanks to our hosting partner, John Campea. And thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in. I'm, of course, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. You can find me on Twitter at BurnettRM or find me on Instagram at RM Burnett. Thanks very much, and we'll see you on the next episode.